Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Vincent Castellano. This is a story I've kept buried for years, but some things don't stay buried, no matter how deep you put them. It happened in the summer of 1971, along the Arizona-Utah border in Monument Valley. I was working as a park ranger back then. The job suited me, quiet, peaceful, and far from people who might ask too many questions about my time in Vietnam. That morning started like any other. I woke before sunrise in my small ranger cabin, made some strong coffee, and stepped outside to watch the first light hit those massive red sandstone mesas. There's nothing quite like a Monument Valley dawn, the way the shadows stretched long across the desert floor, how the light turns those towering rocks into giants watching over ancient Navajo land. I remember feeling at peace for once, watching eagles circle high above. The wind was whistling through those natural stone arches, making a sound like music from another world. I used to love that sound. Now it just reminds me of what came after. I finished my coffee and started my morning patrol. Everything seemed normal at first. Then I noticed something odd. The wind suddenly died down. If you've spent any time in the desert, you know the wind is always there, always moving. But that morning, it just stopped. The silence felt heavy, like something pressing down on my chest. The sun climbed higher, casting a strange blood-red glow across the canyon walls. It looked like the earth itself was bleeding. I told myself it was just the usual morning light, but deep down, I knew something was different. I was miles from the nearest town, with only my crackling radio connecting me to other people. That never bothered me before. I came to the desert for the solitude, but that morning, the isolation felt threatening for the first time. As I walked along one of the trails, a roadrunner darted across my path. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way it moved, frantic, desperate, like it was running from something. I watched it disappear into the brush, feeling uneasy without knowing why. I looked toward the horizon and saw dark storm clouds gathering. That was strange. The forecast had promised clear skies all week. Those clouds looked wrong somehow, too dark and moving too fast. They brought an early darkness that didn't belong in the morning desert. I continued my patrol, passing ancient rock walls covered in petroglyphs. The carved figures seemed to watch me as I walked by. I'd seen them hundreds of times before, but that day, their stone eyes seemed to follow my movements. I know how that sounds, but I'm just telling you what I felt. The air changed too. It grew thick and heavy, hard to breathe, and there was a smell, something rotting in the desert heat. At first, I thought it might be a dead animal nearby, but this smell was different, older, worse. I wasn't a man who scared easily. 3 tours in Vietnam had cured me of that. But standing there in that unnatural stillness, with the blood-red light on the canyon walls and that horrible smell in the air, I felt something I hadn't felt since the war. Pure, cold fear creeping up my spine. I didn't know it then, but that fear was trying to warn me. Something ancient and hungry had awakened in Monument Valley, and it had already spotted me. I should tell you a bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Vincent Castellano. I was 36 that summer of '71. My dad was Italian, my mum Mexican. I grew up in Arizona, not far from the reservation, but I didn't know much about Navajo ways. That would come back to haunt me. Before becoming a ranger, I was a Marine sniper, did 3 tours in Vietnam. I don't like talking about the war, but what happened in those canyons forces me to remember things I've tried hard to forget. During my last tour, there was an accident. Bad intel. Poor visibility during a rainstorm. I was told to take the shot. I did what I was trained to do. Only later did we learn they were civilians, not enemy fighters. Women and children among them. That mistake broke something in me. And just 2 weeks later, my entire squad was ambushed. I was the only survivor. Sometimes I still hear their voices calling for help while I hid. Too injured to move, too scared to make a sound. When I came home, I couldn't sleep without seeing their faces. Couldn't hold a coffee cup without my hands shaking. My family tried to help, but they couldn't understand what I'd seen, what I'd done. Eventually, they stopped trying. All I had left was my father's silver rosary. I'm not a religious man, not anymore, but that rosary was the only piece of family I carried with me into the desert. I kept it in my pocket always, like a good luck charm. Some good luck it turned out to be. That morning, after feeling that strange change in the air, I met up with Maria Begay at the ranger station. She was 28, Navajo, hired as a cultural liaison between the Park Service and the Tribal Council. Smart woman, knew the land better than I did, even though I'd memorized every trail and water source in the monument. "Morning, Vincent," she said, but her voice was different. Quiet, worried. "Something's wrong today." "Just some weird weather moving in," I said. She shook her head. "Not the weather, something else. My grandmother would say the air tastes wrong." I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Your grandmother have experience with wrong tasting air?" Maria didn't smile back. "My grandmother had experience with many things the Park Service training manual doesn't cover." That was Maria, always hinting at the old stories without coming right out and telling them. Usually, I'd just nod and change the subject. I didn't believe in ghost stories and ancient curses. I believed in what I could see, what I could touch, what I could shoot, if it came to that. "We need to check the South Rim today," I said. "Had reports of hikers going into the restricted canyons." Maria's face changed. "The forbidden canyons. We should call for backup. For a couple of lost hikers, we'll be fine." She grabbed my arm, something she'd never done before. "Vincent, those canyons are forbidden for a reason. My people don't avoid places without cause." I gently pulled away. "Your people also say there's a monster that wears human skin like a coat. No offense, but I'll take my chances with some rocks and sand." Looking back, I realized that moment was my last chance to avoid what was coming. My stubborn pride wouldn't let me listen. I thought my time in Vietnam had prepared me for anything. I'd faced men trying to kill me. What could be worse than that? I was about to find out just how wrong I was. Maria and I took the park jeep down the dusty service road toward the South Rim. Neither of us spoke much. The strange silence that had settled over the desert seemed to have gotten between us two. We were about an hour into our drive when Maria suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed. "Stop the jeep," she said. "Look over there." I hit the brakes and followed her gaze. What I saw still haunts my dreams. About 50 yards off the road was a group of cattle, dead cattle. They weren't just scattered around like you'd expect if they'd died from thirst or disease. They were arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward. I grabbed my binoculars for a closer look and felt my stomach turn. Every single cow was missing. Its eyes, the cuts around the sockets were clean, precise, like they'd been removed by a surgeon. "What could do something like that?" I whispered. Maria didn't answer. Her face had gone pale. I put the jeep in park and stepped out. The moment my boots hit the ground, I noticed something else strange. The silence. I mean complete silence. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, not even the wind. Just absolute dead quiet. "We should report this," Maria said, her voice barely audible. "Call it in and wait for backup." I nodded and reached for the radio in the jeep. Static. I tried all channels. Nothing but crackling noise. "Must be the weather," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. The dark clouds I'd seen earlier now hung directly overhead, making midday look like dusk. That's when I spotted the footprints. Human footprints leading away from the circle of dead cattle. I knelt down to examine them. They looked normal enough. Boot prints, probably a man's size, except for one thing. The distance between each step was all wrong, too far apart, like whoever made them had legs twice as long as a normal person. "Someone's messing with us," I said, more to convince myself than Maria. "Some sick joke." "This is no joke," Maria said. "We need to leave now." As she spoke, a smell hit us, the same rotting stench I'd noticed earlier, but stronger. So strong it made us both gag. I covered my nose with my bandana, but it didn't help much. "Let's follow these tracks," I said. "Maybe find who did this." Maria shook her head, but I was already walking. My training kicked in. I needed to investigate, to understand the threat. She reluctantly followed. The tracks led us to a small canyon, one of the areas marked off limits to tourists. As we entered, the smell grew worse. Then we found the campsite. It was a simple setup, a small tent, a camping stove with a pot of beans still warm, 2 folding chairs, but no people. The strange thing was how it looked. like the campers had just gotten up in the middle of eating and walked away. Food still, on plates, drinks half finished. One chair was tipped over like someone had stood up in a hurry. I called out, thinking they might be nearby. My voice echoed off the canyon walls, but no answer came. I reached for my radio again, hoping to get a signal in the canyon. This time, something happened that sent ice down my spine. Instead of static, I heard voices, whispering, speaking words I couldn't understand. Then a child's voice came through clearly saying, "My name, Vincent." Then silence. The radio went completely dead. "Did you hear that?" I asked Maria. Before she could answer, we both heard it. The sound of children crying, echoing from deep within the canyon. Soft at first, then louder. The sound tore at my heart. "There must be kids in trouble," I said, starting toward the sound. Maria grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "There are no children here," she said. "Think, Vincent, our children get this far into restricted land. What you're hearing isn't human." As if to prove her point, the crying suddenly stopped, replaced by laughter that didn't sound right. Too high. Too ... wrong. Maria was searching the campsite, her movements quick and nervous. She stopped suddenly, holding something in her hands. Sheep bones. They were carved with strange symbols that made her face go pale. "What do they mean?" I asked. She shook her head. "I won't say the words, but we need to leave now." I was about to argue when a thick fog rolled into the canyon. From nowhere. It wasn't natural. Normal fog doesn't move like that, doesn't have purpose. This fog seemed alive somehow, curling around us like fingers. Within minutes, I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The familiar landmarks disappeared, leaving us disoriented. "Back to the jeep," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay close." We stumbled through the fog, following our own footprints back. But when we reached the jeep, my heart sank. The engine wouldn't start, not even a click. When I turned the key, and when I looked back at the road we'd come in on, it wasn't there anymore. Just solid rock wall where the path had been. That's when I finally started to believe we were dealing with something beyond my understanding. Something that had trapped us here on purpose. "Maria," I said quietly, "tell me what we're up against." The look in her eyes told me I wasn't going to like the answer. "It's called a skinwalker," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A human who gave up their humanity for power. They can change their shape, take the form of animals or people they've killed." I wanted to laugh it off, tell her she was being superstitious, but after what we'd seen, I couldn't. My mouth felt dry as I asked, "How do we fight it?" "We don't," she said simply. "We survive, if we're lucky." We decided to find shelter and wait for help. Surely someone would notice when we didn't return. To the station, we found a small cave in the canyon wall and set up inside. I kept my service revolver ready, though Maria's look told me it wouldn't help. Night fell quickly, too quickly. The darkness seemed to pour into the canyon like black water. I set up a small fire, more for comfort than warmth. We sat in silence, listening to the night. That's when I first saw it, a shadow moving just beyond. The firelight, not an animal shadow, a human one, but wrong somehow, too tall and thin. I aimed my flashlight, but there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" I asked Maria. She nodded slowly. "Don't look directly at it. Don't let it know you've seen it." I tried to follow her advice, but every few minutes, I'd catch the shadow again from the corner of my eye, moving closer each time, playing with us. Then came the voices. "Vinny, help me, ... I froze. It was Luis Ortega's voice, a man from my squad in Vietnam. A man who died in my arms during the ambush. "It's just the wind," Maria said firmly. "Whatever you hear, it's not real." But it sounded so real. Soon there were more voices, all men from my squad, all dead. They called to me, accused me of abandoning them, begged for help I couldn't give. "Make it stop," I whispered, pressing my hands over my ears. But the voices were somehow inside my head now. That's when I saw him, Luis, standing at the edge of our camp, half his face missing just like when he died, but he was smiling, a smile no human could make, too wide, with too many teeth. "It's not real," I kept telling myself, but when I blinked, there was someone else there, a Vietnamese woman I recognized with horrible clarity. She'd been among the civilians when I took that shot. Now she stood silently, a bullet hole in her forehead, her eyes empty and accusing. I couldn't look away, as her form seemed to ripple and change. Her skin bubbled and stretched, her limbs elongated, joints bending backward. What stood there now wasn't human anymore. A grotesque mixture of human and animal parts covered in rotting flesh. Its eyes locked on mine, and I felt a cold deeper than any winter seep into my bones. It moved like nothing I'd ever seen. One moment by the cave entrance, the next right beside our fire. Too fast to track. Maria was praying in Navajo, her voice shaking. I fired my revolver. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of smoke. The thing tilted its head, curious. Then it laughed with the voices of all my dead squad members at once. We ran. What else could we do? We ran deeper into the canyon, the creature sometimes right behind us, sometimes waiting ahead. It was toying with us. I realized it could have taken us any time it wanted. The canyon seemed to change around us. Paths that should have led out just brought us deeper in. Cacti moved to block our way. The sand shifted under our feet, creating pitfalls. At one point, the thing charged at us with sudden fury. I pushed Maria aside and faced it with nothing but my hunting knife. The stench of rot overwhelmed me as it came close. I slashed at it and felt the blade connect with something solid. It screamed a sound like metal grinding on metal and backed away. A black liquid dripped from a cut in its side. "It can be hurt," I said, surprised. Maria pulled me away before it could recover. "Not for long," she warned, "and now it's angry." We found a higher path along the canyon wall and followed it. Maria seemed to know where she was going now. "There's a place," she said between breaths. "Sacred ground. It might not be able to follow us there." The path grew narrower until we were shuffling sideways along a cliff edge. Below us was darkness so complete it seemed bottomless. That's when Maria suddenly stopped. "Vincent," she said in a strange, flat voice. "I can feel it." When she turned to me, her eyes had changed. They were all black, like pools of oil. "It's inside me," she said, her voice fighting for control. "It's been watching through me, learning you. It knows what you fear, knows your guilt." To my horror, the wounds I'd received in Vietnam, long healed, began to open on my body. Blood soaked through my uniform. The pain dropped me to my knees. I could feel the creature feeding on my fear, my guilt growing stronger. Maria was fighting it, her body shaking as two forces battled for control. "The rosary," she gasped. "Your father's rosary. Silver burns it." With trembling hands, I pulled the silver rosary from my pocket. The moment I touched it to Maria's skin, something inside her screamed. Her body convulsed, and she fell to her knees. "I can't fight it much longer," she said, her voice clear for a moment. "You need to go. Find the burial ground." I single quotes LL ... "Hold it here." "I'm not leaving you," I said. She looked at me, and for a moment, her eyes were her own again. "You have to. It's the only way." Before I could stop her, Maria threw herself forward into the darkness of the canyon. I heard her scream as she fell, but it wasn't just her voice. There was another scream mixed with it, inhuman and filled with rage. I stood there, stunned, as the canyon shook around me. Rocks fell from above. The path beneath my feet began to crumble. The whole place was collapsing. I ran. The silver rosary burned in my hand like it was on fire, but I didn't let go. I followed the path until it opened into a small clearing. Ancient stone markers stood in a circle, the burial ground Maria had mentioned. As I stepped into the circle, the shaking stopped. Outside, the canyon continued to collapse, but inside this sacred space, all was still. The air felt clean for the first time since this nightmare began. I sank to my knees, exhausted and grief-stricken. Maria was gone. She'd sacrificed herself to save me from that thing, to save everyone. Perhaps I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe. When I finally found the strength to leave, the sun was rising. The storm clouds were gone. The air was clear. I made my way out of the canyon, surprised to find our Jeep where we'd left it, working perfectly now. The road was there too, as if it had never disappeared. I drove back to the ranger station and reported what had happened, or a version of it. "A rock slide," I said. "Maria caught in it. They sent search parties, but never found her body." Nobody questioned my story. At least, not out loud. But I was changed. The burns on my hands from the silver rosary never fully healed, and I began to see things, shadows at the corner of my vision, faces in crowds that didn't belong there. The dead, watching me. I quit the Park Service a month later. Couldn't bear to be near that place. But before I left, I heard stories from hikers about a tall figure in a ranger uniform standing at the entrance to the South Canyon, warning people away. They said she was a Navajo woman with sad eyes who told them the ground was cursed. I never went back to check if the stories were true. Some things are better left alone. But I keep my father's rosary with me always now, and I never dismiss someone else's fears as superstition. Not anymore, because I know the truth. Some monsters are real, and sometimes they hunt us. My name is Patricia Donovan, but everyone calls me Patty. What I'm about to tell you happened back in 1966 in a small town called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I still get chills thinking about it. That evening started like any other patrol. The autumn mist was rising from the Ohio River, wrapping around those old abandoned TNT bunkers like a ghostly blanket. You could hear the river rushing by, mixing with the distant hum from the chemical plant down the way. I loved my evening patrols. After leaving nursing, becoming a ranger gave me peace. At least that's what I thought until that night. Something felt off from the moment I stepped out of my truck. The normal forest sounds, birds, insects, small animals rustling in the underbrush, they were all gone. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring because they're searching for any sound at all. The sun was setting, turning the sky this deep orange-red color, like blood spreading through water. The trees, all bare from the coming winter, cast these long, creepy shadows across my path. I remember thinking how strange it looked. I was about 20 miles from town. Out here, the only signs of civilization were those flickering streetlights that marked the road back. They seemed dimmer than usual that night. I was making notes about some tree damage when it happened. This massive group of crows suddenly burst from the trees, hundreds of them, all screeching and cawing like they were warning of something terrible. I'd never seen birds act like that before. Then the weather changed. Just like that, heavy clouds rolled in out of nowhere, bringing this bone-deep chill that cut right through my jacket. In October, it should have been cool, but not this cold. This was a winter cold, the kind that makes your breath freeze. Those old concrete bunkers looked like giant tombstones in that light. Leftovers from World War II when they made TNT here. People always said they were creepy, but that night they seemed alive somehow. Watching. The worst part was the smell, like rotten eggs or sulfur, getting stronger as the wind picked up. There wasn't any factory nearby that should have been making that smell. I checked my watch, 6:43 p.m. That's when everything started to go wrong. I pulled out my flashlight as the darkness grew deeper. I remember thinking I should head back, call it a night. I wish I had. God, I wish I had. I should tell you a bit about myself. I'm 32, with hair that turned silver way too early. My mom says it's the Irish in our blood, but I know better. It turned after the hospital fire, after I couldn't save that little boy. I used to be a nurse. For 7 years, I worked in the emergency room at County General. I was good at it, twosteadyhands.com under pressure. But after watching too many people die, especially that child, something broke inside me. I stopped sleeping. Some nights, I'd just sit on my porch until sunrise, counting stars and wondering why I was still here when others weren't. That's when I decided to become a park ranger. Out in nature, things made sense. Animals live, animals die. Simple circle of life with no machines beeping or families crying in waiting rooms. On that night, I wasn't alone. Dr. James Whitmore was with me, Jim to his friends. He was 45, with kind eyes and a voice that never raised, even when scared. He studied birds and came to investigate why they were acting strange around Point Pleasant lately. Flying in weird patterns, showing up where they shouldn't be, that sort of thing. You ever seen anything like this before, Patty? He'd asked earlier that day, showing me photos of birds flying in perfect circles. Around my neck, I wore my grandmother's Celtic cross. Irish Catholic, born and raised, though I hadn't been to church since that hospital fire. That night, the cross felt hot against my skin, like it was trying to warn me. We should check the north bunkers, Jim suggested as we walked. The strange bird behavior seemed centered there. I nodded, though something in my gut said to turn around. I ignored it. That's what happens when you're a nurse. For years you think you've seen it all. Blood doesn't bother you. Broken bones, gunshot wounds, none of it shakes you anymore. But some things aren't meant to be understood by science or medicine. As we headed toward the bunkers, the cross grew hotter. I touched it through my shirt, wondering if my imagination was playing tricks. "You okay?" Jim asked, noticing me fidgeting. "Fine," I lied. "Just a feeling." "What kind of feeling?" I shrugged, not wanting to sound crazy. "Like we're being watched." Jim laughed, but it was nervous. "By what?" "Nothing lives out here except birds and the occasional deer." I didn't answer, because right then, I realized what was bothering me most about the silence. I couldn't hear a single bird call, not one, and Jim, the bird expert, hadn't noticed yet. I took a deep breath and kept walking, my flashlight beam cutting through the thickening darkness. With each step, the feeling of dread grew stronger, and my hand drifted to the radio on my belt. Maybe we should call for backup, I thought. But what would I say? That I was scared of the quiet. So we kept going, deeper into the forest, toward whatever was waiting for us. The first really wrong thing we found was the birds. Hundreds of them, all dead, laid out in these perfect circles and lines around the bunkers. Not random like they'd fallen from the sky, but placed deliberately, like someone or something had arranged them. "This isn't possible," Jim whispered, kneeling beside one of the patterns. His hands shook as he took photos. "Birds don't die like this. I'd seen plenty of death before, but this was different. Unnatural." "Listen," I said suddenly. Jim looked up, confused. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Where did all the animals go?" We both fell silent, straining to hear any sound of life. There was nothing but our own breathing and the distant rush of the river. As Jim examined the birds, I walked toward one of the bunkers. The mud near the entrance caught my attention. There were impressions in it like giant footprints, but not quite. More like wing marks. Massive wing marks, pressed deep into the ground, spanning wider than my arms could stretch. "Jim," I called, my voice sounding small. "You need to see this." He came over, his flashlight joining mine to illuminate the strange impressions. "Those aren't from any bird I've ever studied," he said, the color draining from his face. The air changed then. It was subtle at first, a metallic taste that reminded me of the hospital, of blood and antiseptic. I ran my tongue over my teeth, trying to get rid of the taste. "Do you taste that?" I asked. Jim nodded, looking uneasy. "Let's keep moving." Further down the road, we found an abandoned car, driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. The engine was running, the radio playing softly, but there was no sign of the driver. "Hello," I called out, my hand moving to the pepper spray on my belt. "Park service. Anyone here?" Only silence answered. I reached for my radio to call it in, but as soon as I turned it on, a high-pitched squeal blasted through the speaker. Pain shot through my head, sharp and sudden. I dropped the radio, pressing my hands to my ears. Jim was doing the same, blood trickling from his nose. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started. "What was that?" he gasped, wiping the blood away with his sleeve. Before I could answer, we heard it a sound like massive wings beating, echoing from inside the nearest bunker. Powerful, rhythmic thumps that made the air vibrate around us. But when we pointed our flashlights toward the entrance, we saw nothing. "We should check inside," Jim said, already moving forward. I grabbed his arm. "Wait, let's think about this." He pulled away gently. "I'm a scientist, Patty. I need to see." Inside the bunker, Jim found more birds. Not just dead, but empty, like someone had neatly removed all their organs, leaving just the skin and bones. "This isn't a predator," he muttered, examining one of the carcasses. "It's too precise." As he spoke, a strange fog began pouring from deeper inside the bunker. It moved wrong, not like normal fog that drifts, but with purpose, like it was alive. And within it, I swear I heard whispers, words in a language I couldn't understand. "We need to leave," I said, pulling on Jim's jacket. "Now," he nodded, finally sensing the danger. We hurried back to my truck, but something strange happened. Every road we took led us right back to the bunkers. No matter which direction we drove, we'd end up facing those concrete structures again, as if the forest itself was keeping us there. After the third try, I stopped the truck and turned to Jim. "Something doesn't want us to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. In the beam of the headlights, I could see Jim's face had gone completely white. He wasn't looking at me, but past me, through the windshield, at something behind us. "Paddy," he whispered, "don't turn around." But of course, I did. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then my eyes adjusted, and I wished they hadn't. It was standing between two trees, a massive shadow, taller than any man I'd ever seen, 8 feet at least, with a shape that wasn't quite human. But it was the eyes that made my blood freeze to glowing red circles, like hot coals burning in the night. They weren't just bright, they seemed to look straight through me, into places nobody should be able to see. "Don't move," Jim whispered, though I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. My body felt heavy, like someone had replaced my blood with ice. A feeling washed over me, then a certainty that something terrible was coming. Not just for us, but for everyone in Point Pleasant. It was like knowing a storm is approaching before you see the clouds, but a million times stronger. The creature, because what else could I call? It had these enormous wings folded behind its back. As we watched, it stretched them out, revealing a wingspan wider than my truck. They made a leathery sound as they opened, like old books being spread apart. Then came the humming, low at first, almost too quiet to hear, but growing louder. It wasn't like any sound I'd heard before, not quite a voice, not quite a machine. The strange thing was, I could see it affecting Jim differently than me. His eyes went wide, and he started mumbling about a bridge collapsing and people screaming. "Do you see it?" he asked, his voice shaking. "The silver bridge, all those cars falling, all those people." I didn't see anything except the creature, but Jim was clearly seeing something else, something horrible. I reached for my guns, issue for rangers dealing with aggressive wildlife. My hand was trembling so badly I could barely grip it, but deep down, I knew bullets wouldn't stop whatever this was. The creature didn't move toward us. It just hovered there, sometimes completely still for what felt like hours, sometimes moving so fast it was just a blur. The air around it seemed different, like it was bending the world near it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Each beat felt painful, like it was fighting against something pushing back. Later, I learned that others who encountered this thing reported the same feeling, like the sound of its wings created some kind of pressure that could stop a human heart. Jim suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "It's showing me something," he gasped. "The bridge. December 15th. Next year, it's going to collapse." As he spoke, the creature's eyes seemed to grow brighter, and images began flashing in my mind. To the silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, twisting and falling into the icy river below, cars plunging into the water, people screaming. It felt so real, like a memory of something that had already happened. Behind the creature, the bunkers seemed to pulse with a strange light, the concrete walls breathing in and out like they were alive. The whole forest felt wrong, twisted by the creature's presence. "We have to warn them," Jim said, his voice distant. "Everyone in town. They need to know." I couldn't speak. The visions kept coming, faster now, people I knew from town, faces frozen in terror as they fell into the dark water. And through it all, those red eyes watched me, waiting for something. Suddenly, Jim opened the truck door. "Where are you going?" I managed to ask, reaching for him. "It wants to show me more," he said, his voice monotone. "I need to understand." "Jim, no." I grabbed his jacket, but he pulled away icily, like he couldn't even feel me. He walked toward the creature, his steps mechanical. I called after him, screaming his name, but it was like he couldn't hear me anymore. The creature's wings spread wider as Jim approached, and the humming grew louder, vibrating through my chest. I had to do something. But what do you do when facing something that shouldn't exist? That's when I remembered the cross around my neck, still burning hot against my skin. I hadn't prayed in years, not since losing that little boy in the fire. But in that moment, with Jim walking toward certain death, and that thing watching with its burning eyes, I found myself whispering words I thought I'd forgotten. "Our Father, who art in heaven, ... The words felt strange on my lips after so long. The cross grew hotter as I spoke, almost burning now. I watched helplessly as Jim walked closer to the creature, its red eyes fixed on him, drawing him in like a moth to flame. That's when it hit me. This thing wasn't just scary, it was trying to warn us. All those visions of the bridge collapse, the specific date, it wasn't threatening us, it was showing us what would happen. "Jim," I shouted again, "it's a warning. The bridge is going to collapse." He paused for a moment, turning slightly. For a second, I thought I'd gotten through to him, but then his eyes, they looked empty, like someone had switched off the light inside. "I need to see it all," he mumbled. "Need to understand." The bunkers around us began to shift and change. Concrete cracked and doorways seemed to move. What was once a simple layout became a maze of dark corridors and dead ends. The night itself felt alive with malice. I jumped out of the truck and ran after Jim. The mud sucked at my boots, making each step a struggle. The air had grown thick, hard to breathe. "Jim, please," I begged, catching up to him. "Whatever it's showing you, it's too much for one person." He looked at me then, really looked, and the pain in his eyes broke my heart. "The things I've seen, Patty," he whispered. "Hundreds will die if we don't stop it. Then we'll warn them." I promised, "Together, but we have to leave this place first." The creature's humming changed pitch, becoming almost angry. The visions in my head grew stronger, the bridge twisting, metal groaning, cars sliding into the icy river. December 15th, 1967. The date burned into my mind. Jim shook his head slowly. "It's too much," he said. "The knowledge, it hurts." Before I could stop him, he turned and walked not toward the creature, but toward the river. His steps were determined now, like he'd made a decision. "Jim, no." I ran after him, but the ground beneath me shifted. What was solid path became sucking mud, and I fell to my knees. By the time I looked up, Jim was already at the riverbank. He turned back once, his face wet with tears. "I can't live with these visions, Patty." The screaming, it won't stop. Then he walked straight into the dark water. I screamed his name until my throat was raw, but he didn't surface. The Ohio River swallowed him without a sound, as if he'd never existed at all. I collapsed on the bank, sobbing. The creature had driven him mad with its visions he couldn't bear to carry. When I finally looked up, the mothman, that's what people would later call it, stood before me. Its red eyes dimmer now, almost sad. "Why?" I asked, anger replacing my fear. Why show him that if he couldn't handle it? The creature made no sound, but somehow I understood. It hadn't meant to hurt him. It couldn't control how humans reacted to its warnings. Some could bear the knowledge, others, like Jim, couldn't. A choice stretched before me: reject what I'd seen and try to forget, or accept the warning and try to save those I could. I thought of the hospital fire, of the little boy I couldn't save. I thought of Jim, driven to desperation by visions too terrible to bear. I couldn't fail again. "Show me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Show me what's coming, and I'll warn them." The cross around my neck burned hotter than ever as the creature's eyes fixed on mine. This time, when the visions came, I forced myself to watch, to remember every detail. I felt my life force draining away with each image, as if the knowledge itself was feeding on my strength, but I held on. When it was over, the creature spread its massive wings. The sound was like thunder cracking overhead. Then it was gone, vanishing into the night sky. I staggered back to my truck, feeling decades older. My hair, already prematurely silver, now had a streak of pure white running through it. The date was burned into my mind. December 15th, 1967. The Silver Bridge would collapse during rush hour, killing dozens if they weren't warned. For a year, I tried to warn people. Some listened, most didn't. They called me Mothman Patty, the crazy ranger who lost her partner and her mind in the woods. But I kept trying, counting down the days. When December 15th finally came, I stood by the riverbank, watching the bridge. At 5:04 p.m., exactly as I'd seen in my visions, the first support gave way. Metal screamed as the bridge twisted and fell into the icy river below. But there were fewer cars than in my vision. Some people had listened. Some had taken different routes that day, because a crazy woman had begged them to. I couldn't save everyone, but I saved some. The dreams started that night. Vivid dreams of things yet to come. Sometimes small things, of friends, pregnancy, a storm that would flood Main Street. Sometimes bigger, a fire at the elementary school that I was able to prevent with an anonymous call. The Mothman never returned to Point Pleasant. Its warning delivered. It moved on to other places, other disasters. But it left me changed forever. Some call me blessed. Others call me cursed. I just know that every time I close my eyes, I see what's coming. And every morning, I wake up and try to change it. My name is Patricia Donovan. This is my story. And it's all true. My name is William Mackenzie, but everyone around these parts just calls me Bill. I've been a ranger in the Green Swamp of North Carolina for almost 8 years now, and I've seen things most folks wouldn't believe. But nothing nothing compared to what happened in the summer of 1954. The green swamp has always felt like home to me. Even when the Spanish moss hangs from the cypress trees like old funeral shrouds, I find comfort in it. Most people get spooked by the swamp at night, but I've always loved how the darkness wraps around you like a blanket, familiar and somehow safe. That night started like any other. The bullfrogs were singing their deep songs, and night birds called back and forth through the trees. These sounds usually made me feel at peace, but tonight they seemed to be hiding something else, something that didn't belong. I was deep in the swamp, at least 5 hours from the nearest road. No one came out this far except me and a handful of locals who knew better than to mess around after dark. The moon was nearly full, sending silver light down through the leaves. It made strange patterns on the black water shapes that seemed to move, even when nothing was there. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, right before everything went quiet. And I mean really quiet. 1 second, the swamp was alive with sounds, and the next nothing. No frogs, no birds, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the whole world. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when I knew something wasn't right. In all my years in these wetlands, I'd never heard such perfect, complete silence. I looked out across the water and saw an alligator, big one, sliding silently away from me. Its eyes caught the moonlight and glowed like amber. Gators don't run from humans. They're the kings here. But this one was swimming away fast, like it knew something I didn't. The air grew thick around me, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just the usual swamp humidity. This was different. The smell of rot and decay seemed stronger, almost overwhelming. I'd grown used to that smell over the years, but tonight it felt like a warning. Dark clouds started gathering overhead, blocking out the moonlight. A storm was coming, and from the look of those clouds, it was going to be a bad one. Summer storms in the Carolina swamps can turn deadly in minutes. Usually, I'd head for higher ground, but something kept me there, frozen in my small boat. That's when I saw ripples in the water about 50 yards ahead. Big ripples, too big for a gator or any animal that should be in these waters. Something large was moving out there, disturbing the black surface in ways that made my skin crawl. I should have turned back right then. I should have started the boat's motor and gotten the hell out of there. But instead, I did what I always do when I should know better. I moved toward the danger. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself. My full name is William Mackenzie, and I come from Scottish folks who settled here 3 generations back. I turned 29 last spring, though sometimes I feel much older. The locals respect me as a ranger, but they keep their distance. Can't blame them. I keep to myself most days. It's easier that way, especially with what happened when I was 16. My brother Tommy and I were hunting deer that fall. He was just 12, too young for his own rifle, but Dad said he could come along and watch. I remember how excited he was, bouncing on his toes as we walked through the woods. I was showing off, not paying attention like Dad had taught us. When I saw movement in the bushes, I fired without being sure of my target. I still hear the sound Tommy made when he fell. After that, I changed, started drinking too much, pushing everyone away. My parents couldn't look at me the same way. Who could blame them? I couldn't look at myself either. The only place I found any peace was out here in the swamp. Something about protecting this wild place made me feel like maybe I could make up for what I'd done. Not that anything ever could. "You've gone quiet again, Bill," said a gravelly voice beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. That was Moses Washington. He was 55, with skin dark and weathered, like old leather, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. Moses knew the swamp better than anyone, even me. His people had lived here since before the Civil War, and he carried the old stories with him. "Just listening to the quiet," I said, not mentioning how much it worried me. Moses nodded, understanding, without words. That's why I liked having him along. He didn't need me to explain things. My hand drifted to the knife at my belt, my grandfather's silver inlaid hunting knife. The handle was worn smooth from 3 generations of Mackenzie hands. A Cherokee medicine man had blessed it long ago, or so my grandfather claimed. I never much believed in such things, but tonight, feeling the knife's weight brought me comfort. "You ever seen the swamp go this quiet before?" I asked Moses. He shook his head slowly. "Not in all my years. Something ain't right, Bill. Something's watching us." I nodded, trying not to show how his words sent a chill through me. I'd been in this swamp hundreds of times. I knew every trail, every hidden waterway, every patch of quicksand, or at least I thought I did. Tonight, everything felt different, like the rules had changed. The truth is, I wasn't scared of dying. After Tommy, part of me thought I deserved whatever bad things came my way. That's what made me reckless. Sometimes I just didn't care enough about staying alive. But as Moses and I drifted deeper into the silent swamp that night, something new stirred inside me. For the first time in years, I felt afraid. Not just for myself, but for Moses too. And somehow, that fear made me feel more alive than I had in a long, long time. "We should head back," Moses said quietly. I shook my head. "No, something's wrong. Out here, we need to find out what." Moses sighed. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." Little did I know that by morning, we'd both be fighting not just for our lives, but for our very souls. Moses and I pushed our boat deeper into the swamp. The silence hung around us like a heavy blanket. I used my paddle to guide us through a narrow channel between two cypress trees. "Over there," Moses whispered, pointing to our right. At first, I didn't see anything in the darkness. Then my eyes adjusted, and I felt my stomach drop. On the small patch of dry land ahead lay the body of a deer. But it wasn't like any animal kill I'd ever seen before. We pulled the boat up to the muddy bank and I stepped out carefully. The deer was completely drained of blood. Its skin hung loose over its bones, like an empty sack. But the strangest thing was the two small, perfect holes in its neck. What could do something like this? I asked, kneeling beside the carcass. Moses stood back, refusing to come closer. "Nothing natural," he said quietly. I noticed something else then. The usual smell of blood that comes with a fresh kill wasn't there. Instead, there was just a faint coppery scent in the air, like the smell of pennies. "Look at this," I called to Moses, pointing at the ground. In the soft mud around the deer were paw prints, big ones, much bigger than any bobcat or panther that should be in these parts. Each print was nearly the size of my hand, with clear claw marks extending from the toes. "Have you ever seen tracks like these before?" I asked. Moses shook his head slowly. "Not in 60 years of hunting these swamps." A sudden breeze rustled the Spanish moss above us, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It felt like we were being watched. "We should keep moving," I said, getting back in the boat. About half a mile further in, we came across something that made my blood run cold. A small hunting camp had been set up on a raised piece of land, but it looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The tent was torn to shreds. Cooking gear and supplies were scattered everywhere. The hunters were nowhere to be seen. "Hello," I called out. "Ranger service. Anyone here?" Only silence answered back. Moses picked up a torn piece of fabric from what used to be the tent. "This didn't happen by accident," he said. "Something tore through here looking for those men." I pulled out my compass to get my bearings, planning to report the missing hunters once we got back. But when I looked down at it, the needle was spinning wildly, unable to find north. I tapped it against my palm, but it kept spinning. "That's not right," I muttered. Before Moses could respond, a sound broke the silence of the swamp. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part wolf howl, part wildcat scream, but somehow worse than either. It echoed across the water, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Moses grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "Bill," he whispered, "we need to leave, now." I nodded, but as we turned back to the boat, Moses suddenly stopped. He was looking at something at the base of a large cypress tree. "What is it?" I asked, moving closer. Around the tree, someone or something had arranged animal bones in a strange pattern. They formed a circle, with smaller circles inside, like a target. In the center lay a small skull, a raccoon, maybe, or a possum. "It's marking its territory," Moses said, his voice barely audible. As if on cue, a thick fog began to rise from the water. It wasn't normal for fog to form on such a warm night. Within minutes, the familiar landmarks I'd used to navigate for years disappeared into the white mist. "Let's get out of here," I said, climbing back into our boat. I pulled the starter cord on the small outboard motor. It sputtered once, twice, then died. I tried again. Nothing. "It was working fine this morning," I said, trying not to let panic creep into my voice. That's when I noticed the current had picked up, pulling our small boat deeper into the swamp, deeper into the fog. toward whatever was waiting for us there. We drifted through the fog for what felt like hours. I kept pulling on the motor's starter cord until my arm ached, but it wouldn't catch. Moses sat silently at the front of the boat, peering into the mist. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. Something didn't want us to leave. There's a patch of high ground about a quarter-mile ahead, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. If we can reach it, we can wait out the night. Moses nodded, but his eyes never stopped scanning the water around us. The swamp had never felt so alien to me. Every shadow seemed to move. Every splash in the water made my heart jump. I kept my rifle across my knees, though deep down I wondered if it would do any good against whatever was out there. Then I saw it. At first it was just a shadow, darker than the others, moving along the bank. I blinked, and it was gone. A trick of the light, I told myself. Bill, Moses whispered, pointing. 2 yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. About 4 feet off the ground, they were watching us. Not like an animal watches, curious or hungry, but with intelligence, with purpose. I raised my rifle slowly. Don't, Moses warned. You'll just make it angry. The eyes blinked and moved closer to the water's edge. Now I could see more of it, a shape like a panther, but much larger. Its shoulders stood as high as a man's waist. Muscles rippled under fur so black it seemed to swallow the moonlight. For the first time since I was 16, I felt truly afraid. Not the usual fear of an animal attack or getting lost in the swamp. This was deeper, more primal. I was being hunted by something that knew exactly what it was doing. I lowered the rifle and picked up my paddle, trying to steer us away. The creature kept pace with us, moving silently through the underbrush along the shore. What is it? Whispered. The old folks call it the beast of Bladenboro, Moses said, his voice shaking slightly. I never believed the stories until now. The beast stopped and seemed to melt into the shadows. 1 second it was there, the next gone. Where did it? I started to ask. The boat rocked violently as something large moved in the water beneath us. Moses grabbed the sides to steady himself. A dark shape passed under our boat, barely visible. In the black water we sat perfectly still for several minutes, afraid to move, to breathe. Then, about 20 yards ahead, the beast rose from the water like a nightmare. Water cascaded off its midnight black fur as it climbed onto a fallen log, its eyes fixed on us, glowing like twin lanterns in the dark. Without thinking, I raised my rifle and fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet swamp. I know I hit it. Ty couldn't have missed at that distance, but the beast didn't flinch. It was as if the bullet passed right through it. The beast opened, its mouth revealing teeth like ivory daggers. A low growl rumbled from its throat, and I swear I could feel it in my chest. A mist seemed to form around its head as it breathed, drifting toward us. Don't breathe it in, Moses warned, covering his mouth and nose with his handkerchief. I did the same, but it was too late. I'd already taken a breath of the strange mist. Immediately, the swamp began to spin round me. The trees seemed to bend and reach toward us with gnarled branches like fingers. The water bubbled and churned as if boiling, though it was cool to the touch. It's not real, Moses said firmly, gripping my shoulder. It's playing with your mind. I nodded, trying to focus. The beast watched us, almost seeming to enjoy our fear. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the darkness again. For the next few hours, it stalked us. Sometimes we'd catch glimpses of it, sliding through the water or moving between trees. Other times, it would disappear completely, only to burst from the underbrush with terrifying speed before vanishing again. It was toying with us. Worse, the swamp itself seemed to be working against us. Vines hanging from trees would sway toward us with no wind to move them. The water level rose steadily, though there was no rain. It was as if the entire swamp was alive and helping the beast hunt us. As dawn approached, Moses pointed to a small island ahead, our original destination. We need to get there, he said. I know what this thing is now, and I know how to stop it. I paddled harder, pushing through water that seemed to fight against each stroke. The beast paced us from the shore, never taking those glowing eyes off us for a second. It's not just a predator, Moses said quietly. It feeds on fear. The more afraid we are, the stronger it gets. Looking into those yellow eyes, I believed him, and for the first time, I wondered if we would make it out of this swamp alive. We finally reached the small island just as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. My arms burned from paddling against the strange current. Moses stepped out first, scanning the tree line for any sign of the beast. "It's still watching us," he said, though I couldn't see it anywhere. The island was barely 50 feet across, with a cluster of ancient cypress trees at its center. Their massive roots twisted above the ground like giant snakes. As we moved closer, I noticed something odd about the way the trees grew. They formed an almost perfect circle. "This isn't just an island," Moses said, his voice low. "It's a burial ground. The native people who lived here long ago buried their dead in this place." I looked at the ground with new eyes and saw small mounds between the trees that I'd mistaken for natural rises in the earth. "The beast is bound to this place," Moses continued. "It can't leave the swamp. These trees form a prison of sorts." "How do you know all this?" I asked. Moses looked away. "Because I've seen it before. 50 years ago, when I was just a boy, it took my older brother." He pulled back his shirt collar, revealing 2 small, round scars on his neck, just like the marks on the deer we'd found. "It bit you?" He nodded. He didn't finish. "Something scared it off, but ever since, I've been connected to it somehow. I can feel when it's near. I can almost hear its thoughts." A shiver ran down my spine. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have believed me?" he asked simply. He was right. I wouldn't have. "So how do we stop it?" I asked. Moses reached into his pack and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing several items: a small vial of dark liquid, a handful of dried herbs, and what looked like a human tooth, yellowed with age. "This is why I came with you today," he said. "I've felt it growing stronger for weeks. I knew it was waking up again." Suddenly, Moses grabbed my arm. "It's here." I spun around, rifle ready, but saw nothing. Then I felt it, a presence, heavy and dark, pressing down on us from all sides. "Your knife," Moses said urgently. "The silver in the blade. That's what we need." I pulled my grandfather's knife from my belt, the silver inlay gleaming dully. "In the pre-dawn light, silver can hurt it," Moses explained. "But to kill it, you need to drive the blade through its heart while it's feeding. That's the only time it's vulnerable, when it's solid enough to feed." "And how do we make it feed?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. Moses looked me straight in the eyes. "It wants me. It's wanted to finish what it started 50 years ago. And now it wants you to, because of what happened to your brother, Tommy," I whispered. "What does my brother have to do with this?" "The beast feeds on guilt as much as fear," Moses said. "Your guilt over your brother's death is like a beacon to it. It's been drawing you here for years, whether you knew it or not." A low growl came from behind us. We turned to see the beast, emerging from the water, its yellow eyes fixed on Moses. "Listen carefully," Moses said quickly. "When it takes me, it will be distracted. That's when you must strike. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just act." "Takes you?" "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't." Moses cut me off. "This is why I came here, to end this, once and for all." Before I could stop him, Moses stepped forward, away from me, toward the beast. He began chanting words in a language I didn't recognize, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. The beast crouched low, muscles tensing. I raised my rifle, but Moses waved me off. "The silver," he reminded me. "Nothing else will work." The beast charged with impossible speed. Moses stood his ground, still chanting. When they collided, I expected blood, violence. Instead, the beast seemed to melt into Moses, like smoke being drawn into his body. Moses fell to his knees, his body shaking violently. When he looked up at me, his eyes had changed. They glowed with the same yellow light as the beast's. "Now, Bill," he gasped, his voice strained as if fighting for control. "Do it now." I hesitated for just a second, seeing my friend's face. That second nearly cost me everything. Moses, or what used to be Moses, lunged at me with inhuman speed. I barely dodged, feeling claws tear through my jacket sleeve. He came at me again, but this time I was ready. As he reached for me, I drove my grandfather's silver-inlaid knife directly into his chest. A scream tore through the swamp, part human, part animal, so loud it shook leaves from the trees. Moses's body convulsed, and a dark shape began to pull free from him, like a second skin peeling away. The beast took solid form again, the knife still embedded in its chest. It thrashed and howled, black blood pouring from the wound. I felt a pull, like something was being drawn out of me too. My vision darkened at the edges, and my legs gave way beneath me. As I fell to my knees, I saw Tommy standing among the cypress trees. He looked just as he had that day in the woods, 12 years old, with that same crooked smile. "It's okay, Bill," he seemed to say, though his lips didn't move. "It wasn't your fault." The beast gave one final, earth-shaking howl. The sound made every tree in the swamp shudder, their leaves falling like rain around us. Then it collapsed, its body seeming to dissolve into black smoke that sank into the ground. I crawled to Moses, but I already knew it was too late. He had given everything to trap the beast, to make it solid enough for my knife to kill it. His eyes, now back to normal, looked peaceful. "Thank you," I whispered, closing his eyes gently. I must have passed out then, because the next thing I remember is waking up as the sun broke through the trees. I felt different, changed in ways I couldn't explain. The guilt I'd carried for so long over Tommy's death seemed lighter somehow, though not completely gone. As I prepared to leave the island with Moses's body, I noticed something strange. My reflection in the water showed my face, but my eyes had changed. They weren't quite yellow like the beast's, but they weren't my pale blue anymore either. Some part of the beast had transferred to me when I killed it. I could feel it inside a darkness, a hunger that hadn't been there before. I've spent the years since that day fighting those urges. Most days I win. Some days are harder than others, but I stay in the swamp, guarding that island, making sure the beast stays buried. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the swamp falls quiet, I swear I can see Moses standing among the cypress trees. He nods to me, like he's saying I'm doing a good job. Then he fades away until the next time. I don't know if I'm alive in the normal sense anymore, but I do know this: as long as I'm here, the beast of Bladenboro will never hunt again.